The year is 1258. The Tigris River runs black with ink from 1,000,000 destroyed manuscripts. The screams have finally stopped echoing through Baghdad's streets, replaced by an unnatural silence that will haunt the Islamic world for centuries. The greatest center of learning in the medieval world lies in ruins, its scholars dead, its libraries burned. This is the work of the Mongols, the inheritors of empire, built by one man's revolutionary understanding of humanity's deepest emotions, fear and loyalty. His name was Temüjin, but history knows him as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. In just 2 decades, this outcast from the Mongolian steppes created the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen, stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe. 30 million square miles. 4 times larger than Alexander's conquests, twice the size of the Roman Empire at its peak. But how? How did an abandoned child become the architect of civilizational change? How did a tribal nobody command such absolute loyalty that his followers would ride thousands of miles to die for him? And perhaps most chilling of all, how did he weaponize terror so effectively that entire cities would surrender at the mere mention of his name? Tonight, we unravel the paradox of Genghis Khan. Was he history's greatest monster or its most misunderstood genius? The answer lies in understanding his masterful manipulation of humanity's 2 most powerful forces, the fear of death and the hunger for belonging. This is the story of how one man conquered not just territories, but the human heart itself. Chapter 1. Child of the Steppes. The Mongolian steppes stretch endlessly under a blood-red sky, where winter winds carry the scent of death and the promise of spring never quite arrives on time. It's 1162, and in a felt tent that shudders against the howling gale, a woman named Helen grips her husband's hand as she brings forth a child who will reshape the world. The baby emerges clutching a blood clot in his tiny fist, an omen, the shaman's whisper, of a life destined to spill rivers of blood. They name him Temüjin, after a Tatar chief his father Yasuge recently captured. But names mean little on the steppes where survival depends not on prophecies, but on cunning, strength, and the ability to inspire both terror and devotion in equal measure. As the infant's cries pierce the night, no one in that windswept tent could imagine that this red-faced baby will one day command the loyalty of millions and strike fear into the hearts of emperors from Beijing to Baghdad. The steppes have produced many warriors, but they are about to witness the birth of something far more dangerous. A man who will understand that true power comes not from the sword alone, but from the mastery of human nature itself. Temüjin's world is one where weakness means death and strength determines everything. The Mongolian steppes of the 12th century are a patchwork of feuding tribes, Mongols, Tatars, Karaits, Merkits, locked in endless cycles of raid, revenge, and alliance. Here, loyalty shifts like the wind, and today's blood brother becomes tomorrow's mortal enemy. It is a harsh school that will teach the future Genghis Khan his first and most crucial lesson. In a world built on betrayal, only absolute control can guarantee survival. Yasuge is a minor chief of the Borjigin clan, respected but not powerful. He rules through a delicate balance of intimidation and alliance, the same tightrope walk that every steppe leader must master. When Temüjin is 9 years old, his father takes him to the conquered tribe to arrange his betrothal to a girl named Bert. The journey back home becomes a defining moment in the boy's life and a masterclass in the fatal consequences of trust. Yasuge accepts hospitality from a group of Tatars, the same tribe that has feuded with his clan for generations. It's either supreme confidence or fatal naivety. The Tatars, recognizing their enemy, serve him poisoned meat. Yasuge manages to ride home, but the poison is already coursing through his veins. As he lies dying, he calls Temüjin to his side and delivers words that will echo through history. Remember, my son, never trust anyone completely. Even your shadow can betray you when the sun moves. The moment Yasuge dies, the Borjigin clan's fragile unity collapses. Without a strong leader, the other families abandon Helene and her children, driving them into the wilderness like unwanted dogs. "We will not be led by a woman and a boy," the clan elders declare. It's a decision they will live to regret. Those who survive long enough. Helen proves to be made of iron wrapped in silk. She keeps her family alive through brutal winters and scarce summers, teaching them to dig for roots, hunt marmots, and fish in icy streams. But survival comes at a cost that goes beyond physical hardship. Temüjin watches his mother transform from a tribal lady into a fierce survivor, and he learns that desperation can forge weapons stronger than any steel. The boy who emerges from this crucible is fundamentally changed. Where once there might have been innocence, now there is calculation. Where there might have been trust, there is wariness. Most importantly, where there might have been acceptance of the natural order, there is now a burning determination to reshape the world according to his will. The steps teach Temüjin other lessons during these years of exile. He learns that fear can be more effective than force when he bluffs his way out of encounters with hostile tribesmen, making his small band seem larger through clever positioning and confident posturing. He discovers that loyalty must be earned through shared hardship and proven reliability lessons he learns by watching his half-brother Begdar's growing arrogance and eventual betrayal of family solidarity. The breaking point comes when Begdar begins asserting dominance over the family's meager resources, treating Temüjin and his full brothers as inferiors. In most families, this would be resolved through harsh words or temporary exile. But Temüjin has learned a different lesson from his father's death. Threats to your authority must be eliminated permanently. One morning, he and his brother Kasar follow Begdar into the steppes and kill him with arrows to the back. It's Temüjin's first murder, but it won't be his last. When Helen discovers what her sons have done, her reaction is telling. She's horrified, but not surprised. The steppes have claimed another piece of innocence, but they also revealed something crucial about her eldest son. He will never allow anyone to threaten what he considers his own. Word of the kinslaying spreads, and the Taichuid tribe, distant relatives who should protect the family, instead decide that Temüjin has become too dangerous to ignore. They capture the teenager and place him in a wooden collar called a kang, planning to keep him as a slave. It's meant to be the end of his story, but instead, it becomes the beginning of his legend. During a festival when his captors are drunk, Temüjin escapes into the night, still wearing the heavy wooden collar. He hides in a river while search parties comb the steppes, demonstrating the patience and cunning that will later make him master of siege warfare. When a sympathetic Taichuid finds him, instead of returning him for the reward, the man helps remove the collar and points him toward home. This act of unexpected kindness teaches Temüjin another crucial lesson. Even enemies can become allies if you understand what motivates them. The man who helps him escape isn't motivated by friendship or tribal loyalty, but by admiration for Temüjin's courage and a gambler's instinct that this young outcast might someday be worth knowing. It's a lesson in human nature that Genghis Khan will later apply on a massive scale, turning conquered enemies into his most devoted followers. By his late teens, Temüjin has received an education that no royal prince could match. He understands poverty, betrayal, survival, and the raw mechanics of power in ways that will serve him throughout his rise. More importantly, he's learned that the traditional step order based on tribal loyalty and inherited authority is fundamentally flawed. His own clan abandoned him. His half-brother betrayed him. Even distant relatives tried to enslave him. These experiences are forging a revolutionary vision. What if loyalty could be earned rather than assumed? What if merit mattered more than birth? What if fear could be wielded as precisely as a sword, making actual violence unnecessary? The abandoned child of the steppes is beginning to imagine a new kind of empire, one built not on the shifting sands of tribal politics, but on the solid foundation of proven devotion and calculated terror. But first, he needs allies. And in the vast expanse of the Mongolian steppes, one relationship will define everything that follows his complex, ultimately tragic bond with a young warrior named Jamuka, who will teach him as much about the power of loyalty as about the price of betrayal. Chapter 2. The Making of a Warrior. The morning mist clings to the grass like the breath of sleeping spirits when two young men meet beside a frozen stream in the spring of 1180. Temüjin, now 18 and hardened by years of exile, faces Jamuka of the Jataran clan, a warrior whose reputation for both brilliance and cruelty already echoes across the steppes. They are about to forge a bond that will reshape the Mongol world, though neither realizes that this friendship will ultimately destroy one of them. Jamuka extends his hand, and in it gleams a knucklebone from a roebuck polished smooth and carved with intricate patterns. "Brother," he says, using the formal address of the steppes, "let us be sworn companions. Let us be Anda." Temüjin produces his own gift, an arrowhead crafted from meteoric iron, and the two young men exchange tokens beneath the eternal blue sky. They prick their palms with knife points, letting their blood mix in a wooden cup before drinking deeply. From this moment forward, they are bound by the most sacred oath of the steppe sworn brothers who will share everything: victory, defeat, life, and death. But even in this moment of perfect unity, the seeds of future conflict are already planted. Jamuka is everything Temüjin once was: a tribal aristocrat with legitimate claim to leadership, charismatic and confident in his birthright. Temüjin is everything Jamuka can never be: a survivor forged in the crucible of abandonment, carrying scars that have taught him lessons no comfortable upbringing could provide. They are drawn to each other precisely because they represent different paths to power, yet this same difference will eventually make their friendship impossible to sustain. For now, though, they are the terror of the steppes. Their combined war bands sweep across the grasslands like wildfire, raiding settlements and taking livestock with surgical precision. Jamuka teaches Temüjin the finer points of steppe diplomacy, how to read the subtle signs that indicate a tribe's true strength, how to exploit ancient grievances between clans, and most importantly, how to project power through reputation as much as actual force. Under his sworn brother's tutelage, Temüjin learns that on the steppes, perception often matters more than reality. Their friendship reaches its pinnacle during the campaign against the Merkits, the tribe that once raided Temüjin's family and holds a grudge that spans generations. But this conflict becomes personal in ways that will define everything about Genghis Khan's future approach to war and loyalty. The Merkits, led by a chief named Chilgar, launch a dawn raid on Temüjin's camp with devastating effectiveness. In the chaos of combat, horses screaming and men dying in the pale morning light, Temüjin loses something more precious than his own life. They capture Bert, the girl he was betrothed to as a child and recently married. The woman who emerges from Temüjin's tent that terrible morning is not just a wife, but a symbol of everything he has fought to build. Bert represents legitimacy, continuity, and hope for a future beyond mere survival. When the Merkits drag her away as their war prize, they inadvertently create the emotional catalyst that will drive Temüjin's transformation from tribal raider to world conqueror. For the first time in his life, the young warrior experiences a fury that transcends personal survival, the cold, calculating rage of a man who refuses to accept any limit on his power to protect what he values. Jamuka recognizes the change in his sworn brother immediately. Where once Temüjin fought for glory and plunder like any steppe warrior, now he fights with the intensity of a man defending his very soul. Together, they plan Bert's rescue with meticulous care that prefigures the military genius Genghis Khan will later display on battlefields from China to Eastern Europe. They spend weeks gathering intelligence about Merkit camps, learning their patterns of movement, identifying their weaknesses. Most importantly, they recruit allies not through traditional tribal obligations, but through promises of shared plunder and appeals to masculine honor. The rescue mission becomes a masterpiece of psychological warfare wrapped in conventional military tactics. Temüjin and Jamuka don't simply attack the merchant camp. They orchestrate a campaign of terror designed to shatter their enemies' morale before the first arrow flies. They spread rumors about the size of their force, plant false evidence of magical protection, and most effectively, they make it known that this is not merely a raid, but a blood vengeance that will continue until every merchant warrior lies dead on the steppes. When they finally strike, it's with the coordinated precision of a wolf pack bringing down prey many times their size. They attack at dawn, splitting their forces to create the illusion of being surrounded while using the morning mist to conceal their true numbers. The merchants, already demoralized by weeks of psychological pressure, break and run before the battle truly begins. Temüjin finds Bird in the tent of a merchant warrior, pregnant with a child whose paternity will forever remain uncertain, but whose existence will never diminish Temüjin's devotion to his wife. The rescue of Bird teaches Temüjin several crucial lessons that will define his later conquests. First, he discovers that victory belongs not necessarily to the strongest, but to those who best understand their enemy's fears and weaknesses. Second, he learns that personal loyalty, the kind forged in shared crisis rather than inherited, tradition creates bonds stronger than any tribal obligation. Most importantly, he realizes that his own capacity for love and protection can be weaponized, transformed into a source of power that makes him more dangerous than warriors motivated by mere ambition or bloodlust. But success creates its own problems. As Temüjin's reputation grows and his following increases, the dynamic between the sworn brothers begins to shift. Jamuka, accustomed to being the senior partner in their alliance, watches with growing unease as tribal leaders increasingly defer to his younger Anda. The change is subtle at first, warriors seeking Temüjin's counsel before Jamuka's captured plunder being divided according to Temüjin's wishes rather than traditional protocols. But subtlety has never been the way of the steppes, and soon the tension becomes impossible to ignore. The breaking point comes during a hunting expedition when members of both war bands begin openly debating which leader they should follow permanently. The discussion is framed in terms of practical advantages. Temüjin's growing reputation for loyalty to his followers versus Jamuka's superior connections among established tribal leaders. But both sworn brothers understand that the real question being debated is which of them has the stronger claim to reshape the Mongol world according to his vision. That night, around a campfire that flickers like a dying star, Jamuka makes a statement that will echo through history. "Brother, we have ridden together like twin eagles soaring over the steppes. But eagles cannot share the same hunting ground forever." His words are carefully chosen, maintaining the forms of respect while delivering an ultimatum that both men understand perfectly. Their friendship has become too dangerous for both of them to survive. Temüjin's response reveals the man he has become since those desperate years of exile. Rather than responding with anger or immediate challenge, he simply nods and says, "Then let us see which of us the eternal blue sky favors." It's a masterpiece of diplomatic ambiguity that maintains honor while acknowledging reality. Their blood, brotherhood, is ending not in betrayal, but in recognition that their paths have diverged beyond any possibility of reconciliation. The dissolution of their alliance marks the end of Temüjin's apprenticeship and the beginning of his emergence as an independent power. He has learned everything Jamuka could teach him about steppe politics, military strategy, and the manipulation of tribal rivalries. More importantly, he has discovered something about himself that will prove crucial in the years ahead. His ability to inspire loyalty transcends traditional tribal boundaries and creates possibilities that neither inherited authority nor conventional charisma can match. As the two former sworn brothers part ways the next morning, each leading his followers in opposite directions across the endless grasslands, they are no longer merely rival tribal leaders. They have become representatives of competing visions for the Mongol future Jamuka, defending the traditional order of inherited privilege and tribal independence. Temüjin pioneering a revolutionary new model based on merit, loyalty, and unified command. The steppes are about to witness a conflict that will determine not just who rules the Mongols, but what kind of empire they will build and how far across the world their influence will spread. Chapter 3. Uniting the Clans. The sacred mountain of Berken-Kaldon rises from the steppes like a stone finger pointing toward the eternal blue sky. Its slopes covered with the white felt tents of a gathering, unlike any the Mongol world has ever seen. It is the spring of 1206, and representatives from dozens of tribes have traveled hundreds of miles to witness an event that will reshape the balance of power from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. Today, a tribal outcast named Temüjin will be proclaimed Genghis Khan universal ruler, but the path to this moment has been carved through 2 decades of warfare that transformed not just the man but the very nature of steppe society itself. The years since Temüjin's break with Jamuka have been marked by a series of campaigns that demonstrate his evolving mastery of both military strategy and political psychology. Unlike traditional steppe warfare, which focuses on quick raids and seasonal campaigns, Temüjin has pioneered a new approach that combines overwhelming force with sophisticated intelligence gathering and revolutionary recruitment policies. Where other leaders rely on tribal loyalty and family connections, he builds his army through merit and proven devotion, creating a war machine that transcends traditional clan boundaries. His first major test comes against the Tatars, the tribe that poisoned his father and represents everything he despises about the old order. But this is not a simple revenge campaign driven by emotion. It's a carefully orchestrated demonstration of the new style of warfare that will eventually conquer half the known world. Temüjin spends months gathering intelligence about Tatar movements, learning their seasonal patterns, identifying their allies and enemies. Most importantly, he recruits spies from within their own ranks, turning captured warriors into informants through a combination of generous treatment and carefully applied psychological pressure. When he finally strikes, the Tatars discover that they are not facing a traditional steppe raid, but something entirely new: total war waged with systematic precision. Temüjin doesn't simply defeat their warriors. He eliminates their capacity to threaten anyone ever again. Adult males are executed with methodical efficiency. Women and children are distributed among his followers, but not as slaves. They are adopted into Mongol clans and given the opportunity to earn full membership through loyalty and service. It's a strategy that accomplishes multiple objectives simultaneously. It removes a permanent threat, increases his own military strength, and demonstrates to potential enemies that submission offers survival while resistance guarantees extinction. The Tatar campaign establishes the template for everything that follows. Each subsequent conflict becomes a laboratory for testing new methods of psychological warfare, intelligence gathering, and political integration. Against the Merkits, he perfects the art of night attacks and coordinated cavalry charges. Fighting the Naimans, he learns to exploit religious and cultural divisions within enemy ranks. Most importantly, in his ongoing struggle with Jamuka, he develops the sophisticated propaganda techniques that will later terrify civilizations thousands of miles from the Mongolian steppes. The war between the former sworn brothers becomes a contest not just of military strength, but of competing ideologies about how society should be organized. Jamuka represents the traditional steppe order tribal aristocracy, inherited leadership, and the assumption that warriors fight for glory and plunder rather than any larger purpose. His followers are brave and skilled, but they remain fundamentally divided by clan loyalties and personal ambitions that prevent them from achieving true unity of command. Temüjin offers something revolutionary, a meritocracy wrapped in military efficiency and bound together by shared sacrifice. His followers don't fight for tribal honor, but for a vision of Mongol greatness that transcends traditional boundaries. More importantly, they fight for a leader who has proven repeatedly that he values loyalty above birth, competence above connections, and collective success above personal glory. It is a message that resonates powerfully with warriors who have spent their lives watching less capable men hold positions of authority simply because of their family names. The decisive moment comes at the Battle of Koyaitan, where psychological warfare proves as important as military tactics. Rather than simply attacking Jamuka's forces, Temüjin orchestrates a campaign of defections that turns his enemy's own strengths against him. He sends secret messages to Jamuka's subordinate commanders, offering them positions of leadership in a unified Mongol army, while spreading rumors about Jamuka's increasingly erratic behavior and his willingness to sacrifice followers for personal ambition. The battle itself unfolds like a choreographed demonstration of the new way of war. Temüjin's forces move with unified precision, each unit responding to horn signals and flag commands that allow complex maneuvers to be executed with split-second timing. When Jamuka's warriors charge, expecting traditional steppe combat, they instead face disciplined ranks that give ground strategically while preparing devastating counterattacks. Most demoralizing of all, they discover that many of their own allies have secretly switched sides, turning what should have been a fair fight into a carefully orchestrated trap. Jamuka escapes the battlefield, but his power is broken forever. Over the following months, his remaining followers drift away until he is finally betrayed by his own bodyguards and delivered to Temüjin's camp in chains. The reunion between the former sworn brothers becomes one of history's most poignant examples of how political necessity can destroy even the deepest personal bonds. Temüjin offers Jamuka a position of honor in his new order, but both men understand that such accommodation is impossible. Jamuka chooses death over submission, asking only that he be executed without spilling his blood, a traditional honor accorded to fallen nobility. With Jamuka's death, the last significant opposition to Mongol unification collapses. Tribe after tribe submits to Temüjin's growing power, but these submissions are not mere acknowledgments of military defeat. They represent something unprecedented in steppe history: the voluntary surrender of tribal independence in exchange for participation in a larger, more powerful organization. Warriors who once fought as Tatars or Merkits or Karaites now think of themselves as Mongols first, their old tribal identities subsumed into a new collective identity that promises greatness beyond anything their ancestors could have imagined. The Kurultai of 1206 that proclaims Temüjin as Genghis Khan is both the culmination of his rise and the beginning of an even more ambitious phase of expansion. The assembly includes representatives from every major Mongol tribe, but it's not a traditional council of equals debating policy. Instead, it's a carefully orchestrated coronation designed to legitimize revolutionary changes in how Mongol society will be organized. The new Khan doesn't simply assume leadership of existing tribal structures. He abolishes them, entirely replacing hereditary clan loyalties with a decimal military system that divides his entire people into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors. This reorganization accomplishes several crucial objectives simultaneously. It destroys the power base of potential rivals by mixing warriors from different tribes within the same units, making tribal rebellion impossible to organize. It creates opportunities for promotion based on merit rather than birth, allowing talented commoners to rise to positions of real authority. Most importantly, it transforms the Mongol military from a loose confederation of tribal warbands into a unified army capable of executing complex strategic operations across vast distances. The decimal system becomes the foundation for everything that follows. But it's only one part of Genghis Khan's revolutionary restructuring of Mongol society. He establishes a written law code that applies equally to all Mongols, regardless of their tribal origins. He creates an intelligence service that monitors not just external enemies, but internal dissent, ensuring that potential opposition can be identified and neutralized before it becomes dangerous. Most remarkably, he institutes policies of religious tolerance and cultural accommodation that allow conquered peoples to maintain their traditions while serving the greater Mongol enterprise. These reforms represent more than administrative efficiency. They embody a fundamentally new understanding of how empires can be built and maintained. Traditional steppe confederations relied on the personal charisma of individual leaders and the temporary alignment of tribal interests. Genghis Khan creates something far more durable: institutional structures that can survive the death of any single leader and expand indefinitely without losing cohesion or effectiveness. As the Kurultai concludes and the tribal representatives return to their homes, they carry with them not just news of a new Khan, but awareness of a new kind of political organization that promises to reshape the relationship between rulers and ruled throughout the known world. The Mongols are no longer simply another nomadic confederation competing for grazing rights on the steppes. They have become the nucleus of a world empire, bound together by revolutionary principles of leadership, organization, and expansion that will soon be tested against the greatest civilizations of medieval Asia. Chapter 4. The Fear Machine. The messenger arrives at the gates of Zhongdu at dawn, his horse foam-flecked and trembling from a ride that has consumed 3 days and nights. In his trembling hands, he carries a silk scroll bearing news that will transform the Jin dynasty's understanding of warfare forever. The message is written in perfect Chinese calligraphy, its elegant brushstrokes forming words that chill the blood. I am Genghis Khan, sovereign of the rising sun. Your emperor may choose between submission and extinction. There is no third path. But it is not the words themselves that terrify the court officials, who read them. It nests the accompanying bundle of human ears, 137 pairs, taken from the garrison of a border fortress that no longer exists. This is psychological warfare elevated to an art form, and it represents Genghis Khan's most revolutionary innovation in the science of conquest. Where other conquerors rely primarily on military superiority, the Mongol Khan has discovered that the human imagination can be weaponized more effectively than any sword or siege engine. Fear, properly cultivated and strategically deployed, can accomplish what armies cannot. It can make enemies defeat themselves before the first battle is fought. The development of this fear machine begins with Genghis Khan's systematic study of human nature during his early campaigns against the Mongol tribes. He observes how warriors react differently to various types of threats, how some men crumble when faced with uncertainty, while others fight more fiercely when cornered. Most importantly, he discovers that fear spreads like wildfire through communities, growing stronger and more paralyzing as it passes from person to person. What begins as a rational assessment of military disadvantage quickly transforms into supernatural dread that robs entire populations of their will to resist. The Khan's genius lies in understanding that different cultures fear different things, and his intelligence network becomes as sophisticated as any modern espionage organization. Before attacking any settlement, Mongol scouts spend weeks or months learning not just about military defenses, but about local beliefs, superstitions, and cultural taboos. They identify what each society values most: family honor, religious sanctity, economic prosperity, and then craft threats specifically designed to target these psychological vulnerabilities. Against Chinese cities, where Confucian order and bureaucratic hierarchy dominate social organization, the Mongols emphasize their willingness to destroy records, eliminate entire family lines, and reduce centuries of careful cultural development to smoking ruins. The message is reinforced through carefully orchestrated demonstrations of cultural destruction that serve no military purpose but create maximum psychological impact. Libraries are burned in public ceremonies, ancestral tablets are deliberately defiled, and captured scholars are forced to perform humiliating acts that shatter the Chinese sense of civilizational superiority. When facing Islamic communities, where religious unity and scholarly achievement represent core cultural values, the Mongols adapt their psychological warfare accordingly. They make a point of destroying mosques and madrasas, scattering religious texts in the streets for horses to trample, and forcing imams to renounce their faith publicly. But they also demonstrate sophisticated understanding of Islamic law and theology, using religious arguments to justify their conquests and exploiting sectarian divisions to turn different Muslim communities against each other. The intelligence gathering that makes this precision psychological warfare possible operates on multiple levels. Mongol merchants, claiming to be ordinary traders, spend years establishing commercial relationships in target cities while mapping defenses, identifying key leaders, and assessing public morale. Captured prisoners are systematically interrogated not just about military matters, but about local politics, economic conditions, and social tensions that might be exploited. Most importantly, the Mongols cultivate networks of local collaborators who provide ongoing intelligence about changing conditions and emerging opportunities. This information flows back to Genghis Khan through a communication system that demonstrates the same organizational genius he applies to military affairs. The Mongol Empire develops the most efficient postal service in the medieval world, with relay stations positioned every 25 miles across thousands of miles of territory. Messages can travel from the Chinese border to Mongol headquarters in a matter of days, allowing the Khan to coordinate psychological warfare campaigns across vast distances with unprecedented precision. But the fear machine's effectiveness depends on more than just intelligence and communication. It requires absolute consistency in following through on threats. Genghis Khan understands that psychological warfare only works if potential enemies believe that submission really does offer safety, while resistance guarantees destruction. This means that every threat must be carried out exactly as promised, regardless of circumstances or consequences. The Siege of Otrar provides a perfect example of this principle in action. When the governor of this Khwarezmian border city executes Mongol ambassadors and confiscates their trade goods, he commits an act of diplomatic aggression that would normally result in compensation payments or limited military retaliation. Instead, Genghis Khan treats it as an opportunity to demonstrate the absolute consequences of defying Mongol authority. The siege lasts 6 months, but its real purpose is not the capture of a single city, but the creation of a legend that will terrify potential enemies across Central Asia. When Otrar finally falls, the Mongols execute every inhabitant except for craftsmen and young women. But they do so according to a carefully choreographed script designed to maximize psychological impact. The governor who ordered the execution of Mongol ambassadors has molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, dying slowly while the city burns around him. The spectacle is witnessed by carefully selected survivors who are then released specifically to carry news of Mongol vengeance to other cities. The message is unmistakable. Diplomatic immunity is sacred to the Mongols, and violating it brings consequences that transcend ordinary military defeat. The systematic nature of Mongol psychological warfare extends beyond individual atrocities to encompass entire campaigns designed as demonstrations of imperial power. The invasion of Khwarezm unfolds like a massive theatrical production, with each captured city serving as a stage for increasingly elaborate displays of Mongol capabilities. At Bukhara, the Mongols force the population to destroy their own fortifications, while Mongol officers deliver lectures about the futility of resistance. At Samarkand, they construct pyramids from the skulls of defenders, while sparing craftsmen and merchants who demonstrate useful skills. These displays serve multiple purposes simultaneously. They terrorize potential enemies into submission, but they also advertise Mongol power to potential allies and trading partners. Local rulers across Central Asia and beyond begin sending tribute and offers of alliance, not because they've been defeated in battle, but because they've witnessed demonstrations of power that make resistance seem both futile and unnecessarily costly. The psychological warfare system also includes sophisticated propaganda, designed to exploit existing political tensions and social divisions within enemy societies. Mongol agents spread rumors about corrupt local leaders, economic mismanagement, and military incompetence, creating popular unrest that weakens resistance before Mongol armies even arrive. They also offer alternative visions of political organization that appeal to groups marginalized under existing systems, merchants frustrated by excessive taxation, minor nobles excluded from power, religious minorities facing persecution. Most remarkably, the Mongols developed techniques for turning their own reputation for brutality into a diplomatic asset. Cities that surrender without resistance are treated with conspicuous mercy, their populations protected, and their economic activities encouraged. This creates a stark contrast with the fate of communities that choose to resist, making the benefits of submission as obvious as the costs of defiance. Word spreads quickly that Mongol rule, while demanding absolute obedience, can actually be preferable to the corrupt, inefficient, or oppressive governments it replaces. The fear machine's effectiveness ultimately depends on its integration with genuine military capability and administrative competence. Psychological warfare creates opportunities, but those opportunities must be exploited through skilled generalship, disciplined troops, and effective governance of conquered territories. Genghis Khan's genius lies in understanding that fear and loyalty are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a single system of control that can expand indefinitely across cultural and geographical boundaries. As news of Mongol victories spreads across the known world, the fear machine begins to operate independently of actual military campaigns. Cities surrender before Mongol armies arrive. Rulers send tribute to avoid attracting Mongol attention. Entire regions reorganize their political systems in anticipation of eventual Mongol conquest. The Khan has discovered something that will influence military thinking for centuries. The most devastating weapon is not the one that destroys enemies, but the one that convinces them to destroy themselves. Chapter 5. Breaking the Great Wall. The Great Wall of China stretches across the northern horizon like a stone dragon frozen in eternal sleep. Its watchtowers and fortifications representing 8 centuries of Chinese engineering genius designed to keep the barbarian nomads exactly where they belong on the wrong side of civilization. For generations, this barrier has defined the relationship between the settled world and the steppes, a concrete manifestation of Chinese superiority that transforms military defense into cultural statement. But in the spring of 1211, as Mongol scouts examined the wall's defenses with professional interest, this ancient symbol of permanence is about to learn a harsh lesson about the temporary nature of all human achievements. Genghis Khan approaches the invasion of Jin dynasty China with the methodical patience of a master craftsman preparing his greatest work. This is not another steppe raid designed to capture livestock and slaves. It's the first test of whether his revolutionary military and political innovations can function against the most sophisticated civilization in the medieval world. The Jin dynasty controls northern China with an army of over 1 million men, protected by fortifications that have never been breached by nomadic forces. Their capital at Zhongdu is larger than any city the Mongols have ever seen, defended by walls 40 feet high and surrounded by a population that views steppe nomads as barely human savages incapable of understanding civilized warfare. The Chinese confidence proves to be both their greatest strength and their fatal weakness. Jin military doctrine, refined through centuries of experience fighting nomadic raiders, assumes that steppe warriors are formidable in open battle, but helpless when confronted with sophisticated fortifications and siege warfare. They prepare for the traditional pattern of nomadic invasion, quick strikes followed by withdrawal when winter approaches and grazing becomes scarce. What they cannot imagine is an enemy that combines nomadic mobility with Chinese siege techniques, Roman organizational methods, and Persian diplomatic sophistication, all welded together by Mongol discipline and Genghis Khan's strategic genius. The Khan's preparation for the Chinese campaign demonstrates the systematic intelligence gathering that has become central to Mongol military doctrine. For 3 years before the invasion begins, Mongol merchants and diplomats crisscross Jin territory, ostensibly negotiating trade agreements while actually mapping every fortress, road, and river crossing between the Great Wall and the Yellow River. They study Chinese military organization, learning about command structures, supply systems, and tactical doctrines. Most importantly, they identify the political tensions and economic weaknesses that can be exploited to turn Chinese strengths against themselves. The Mongols discovered that the Jin dynasty, despite its impressive military resources, suffers from fundamental structural problems that make it vulnerable to sustained pressure. The Jurchen minority that rules China depends on Chinese administrators and soldiers for day-to-day governance, creating divided loyalties that can be exploited through careful psychological warfare. The army, while large and well-equipped, is designed for defensive operations and lacks the mobility necessary for effective pursuit of nomadic forces. Most critically, the Chinese economy depends on trade routes and agricultural regions that cannot be adequately defended against fast-moving cavalry forces willing to accept heavy casualties in exchange for strategic objectives. When the invasion finally begins, it unfolds unlike any previous nomadic assault on Chinese territory. Instead of testing the Great Wall's strongest points, Mongol forces probe systematically for weaknesses, while Chinese defenders wait for the main attack that never comes. Small units, often numbering fewer than 100 warriors, infiltrate through mountain passes and river valleys that Chinese engineers deem too difficult to fortify adequately. These infiltrators don't engage Chinese garrisons directly, but instead establish intelligence networks, sabotage supply lines, and create the psychological pressure that will eventually prove more devastating than any direct assault. The first major breakthrough comes at Juyang Pass, where Chinese overconfidence creates an opportunity that Mongol flexibility exploits with devastating effectiveness. The pass is defended by 3 successive lines of fortification, each designed to halt nomadic advances while allowing Chinese reinforcements to arrive from nearby garrisons. But Mongol siege engineers, many of them Chinese defectors who understand both defensive systems and their weaknesses, identify a critical vulnerability in the pass's water supply system. The assault on Juyang Pass becomes a masterpiece of combined arms warfare that demonstrates how thoroughly the Mongols have absorbed and improved upon Chinese military techniques. While traditional nomadic tactics pin down the defenders with archery and cavalry charges, Chinese engineers in Mongol service use catapults and siege engines to breach the fortifications systematically. Most importantly, Mongol psychological warfare specialists spread rumors among the Chinese garrison about massive reinforcements approaching from the steppes, creating panic that transforms tactical defeat into complete collapse of defensive morale. The fall of Juyang Pass shatters Chinese assumptions about nomadic military capabilities and begins a psychological cascade that proves as destructive as any physical assault. News spreads throughout the Jin dynasty that the Mongols possess siege engines, understand fortification warfare, and command resources that make prolonged resistance potentially futile. Chinese military commanders, trained to fight defensive campaigns against traditional nomadic raids, find themselves facing an enemy that can sustain offensive operations indefinitely while adapting tactics to exploit every Chinese weakness. As Mongol forces pour through the breached defenses, they encounter a landscape that, provides both opportunities and challenges, unlike anything they have faced on the steppes. Northern China's agricultural wealth offers the possibility of feeding massive armies for extended periods, but it also requires techniques of territorial control that nomadic traditions never developed. Chinese cities contain populations larger than entire Mongol tribes, creating administrative challenges that traditional steppe methods cannot address. Most importantly, Chinese technological sophistication presents opportunities for military advancement that could transform Mongol capabilities far beyond their original nomadic limitations. Genghis Khan's response to these challenges demonstrates the intellectual flexibility that makes him more than just another successful military commander. Rather than trying to impose steppe traditions on Chinese realities, he creates hybrid institutions that combine the best elements of both systems while eliminating their respective weaknesses. Chinese administrators who demonstrate competence and loyalty are retained in positions of authority, but under Mongol supervision that ensures their expertise serves imperial rather than local interests. Chinese siege engineers and weapons specialists are integrated into Mongol military units, sharing their knowledge while learning nomadic mobility techniques that make their skills more tactically versatile. The siege of Zhengdu becomes the ultimate test of this hybrid approach to warfare and administration. The Jin capital is protected by fortifications that represent the pinnacle of Chinese military engineering, defended by an army that includes the dynasty's best generals and most experienced troops. The city's population exceeds 500,000 people, making it larger than some entire European kingdoms, while its treasures represent centuries of accumulated wealth from the world's most sophisticated economy. The Mongol approach to this ultimate challenge combines traditional siege techniques with revolutionary innovations in psychological warfare and economic pressure. Rather than attempting direct assault on the city's walls, Mongol forces systematically eliminate the agricultural and commercial networks that keep Zhengdu's massive population fed and supplied. Chinese defenders find themselves trapped in an increasingly desperate situation where military victory becomes meaningless if the civilian population starves to death behind their own fortifications. The siege lasts more than a year, but its outcome becomes inevitable long before the walls are breached. Chinese attempts to break the Mongol blockade fail repeatedly as nomadic mobility proves superior to Chinese heavy cavalry in the open terrain surrounding the capital. Relief armies sent from other Jin strongholds are defeated in detail by Mongol forces that can concentrate overwhelming strength at critical points while maintaining effective surveillance over vast areas. Most demoralizing of all, Chinese intelligence networks discover that Mongol siege engineers are preparing weapons and techniques that make even the strongest fortifications vulnerable to systematic assault. When Zhengdu finally falls, the systematic looting that follows demonstrates both Mongol thoroughness and their evolving understanding of how to convert military victory into long-term political advantage. The city's material wealth is distributed according to Mongol military custom, but its human resources are treated as strategic assets rather than mere plunder. Chinese craftsmen, scholars, and administrators are relocated throughout the growing Mongol Empire, spreading Chinese technological knowledge while ensuring that their expertise serves imperial rather than regional interests. The conquest of northern China transforms the Mongol Empire from a successful nomadic confederation into a genuinely global power capable of challenging any civilization in the medieval world. Chinese siege techniques, combined with Mongol mobility and organization, create military capabilities that no existing power can match effectively. Chinese administrative methods, adapted to serve Mongol imperial purposes, provide tools for governing diverse populations across vast distances. Most importantly, Chinese wealth and technological sophistication give the Mongols resources that make indefinite expansion not just possible, but economically profitable. As news of Zhengdu's fall spreads across Asia and beyond, rulers from Korea to Eastern Europe begin reassessing their assumptions about the balance of power in the medieval world. The Mongols are no longer simply another nomadic threat that can be contained through traditional defensive measures. They have become something unprecedented, a nomadic empire with the resources and capabilities of settled civilization, guided by strategic vision that recognizes no geographical or cultural limits to its expansion. Chapter 6: The Khwarezmian Catastrophe. The caravan stretches across the Silk Road like a golden serpent basking in the Central Asian sun. 500 camels laden with silk, jade, and precious metals that represent the wealth of nations. At its head rides Inalhuk, governor of Otrar and cousin to Sultan Ala ad-Din Muhammad, confident in his authority and contemptuous of the barbarian merchants who dare to conduct business as equals with civilized men. It is autumn 1218, and this encounter between Mongol traders and Khwarezmian officials will trigger a catastrophe that reshapes the map of the medieval world. When Inalhuk orders the execution of every member of the Mongol trading mission and confiscates their goods, he believes he is asserting the natural superiority of settled civilization over nomadic barbarism. Instead, he has just signed the death warrant for his entire civilization. The merchants die believing they are protected by the most sacred law of the steppes, the immunity of diplomatic representatives. Their leader, a man named Yukuna, carries credentials from Genghis Khan himself, marking this not as mere commercial venture, but as formal state-to-state diplomacy between equal powers. When word of their execution reaches the Mongol court, it arrives with the severed heads of 3 envoys sent to demand satisfaction, their beards shaved in deliberate insult to add humiliation to murder. For Genghis Khan, this represents something beyond mere provocation. It is a fundamental challenge to the principle that treaties and diplomatic immunity form the foundation of international relations. The Khan's response reveals the calculating fury that has made him master of half Asia. Rather than launching an immediate retaliatory raid, he spends 18 months preparing for a campaign that will demonstrate to the entire world what happens when civilized nations mistake Mongol restraint for weakness. Every aspect of the operation is planned with meticulous attention to detail that transforms military conquest into theatrical performance designed to terrify potential enemies across 3 continents. The intelligence preparation alone represents a masterpiece of strategic planning that utilizes every resource the Mongol Empire has developed over 2 decades of expansion. Merchants, scholars, and pilgrims crisscross Khwarezmian territory for more than a year, mapping not just military installations but economic networks, political relationships, and social tensions that can be exploited when war begins. They identify which cities depend on long-distance trade, which governors harbor ambitions for independence, and which populations suffer under taxation policies that make Mongol rule potentially preferable to existing arrangements. Meanwhile, the Mongol war machine undergoes systematic preparation that demonstrates how thoroughly it has absorbed and improved upon Chinese siege techniques, Persian administrative methods, and Central Asian commercial practices. Chinese engineers construct siege engines, designed specifically for attacking the massive fortifications that protect Khwarezmian cities. Turkish and Persian cavalry specialists train Mongol units in the combat techniques that dominate Central Asian warfare. Most importantly, the decimal organization system is refined to allow unprecedented coordination between forces separated by thousands of miles of hostile territory. When the invasion finally begins in 1219, it unfolds with a precision that shatters every assumption about nomadic military capabilities. 4 separate Mongol armies, each larger than most medieval kingdoms could field, cross the Sir-Darius simultaneously at points hundreds of miles apart. Sultan Muhammad, expecting traditional nomadic tactics, positions his forces to defend the most obvious invasion routes while maintaining strong reserves near his capital. Instead, he finds himself facing enemies who seem to appear everywhere at once: moving with supernatural speed while demonstrating siege capabilities that make his strongest fortresses vulnerable to systematic assault. The psychological impact proves as devastating as the military campaign itself. Mongol forces approaching each target city send ahead carefully composed messages that offer stark choices, presented in language calculated to exploit local cultural anxieties. To Islamic communities, they present themselves as instruments of divine judgment punishing rulers who have violated sacred laws of hospitality and diplomatic immunity. To merchant classes, they emphasize their commitment to protecting trade and commerce under imperial authority. To oppressed minorities, they promise religious tolerance and administrative positions based on merit rather than ethnic identity. The Siege of Bukhara becomes the first act in a drama designed to demonstrate that Mongol power transcends anything the Islamic world has previously encountered. The city's massive walls and sophisticated defenses, built to withstand conventional siege warfare, prove inadequate against enemies who combine Chinese engineering with steppe mobility and unlimited manpower. But the real destruction is psychological rather than physical. When the city falls, Genghis Khan himself enters the Great Mosque and addresses the assembled population with words that echo across the Islamic world. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The systematic destruction that follows serves multiple strategic purposes simultaneously. The physical elimination of Bukhara's defensive capabilities ensures it cannot serve as a rallying point for future resistance. The careful preservation of craftsmen and scholars demonstrates Mongol appreciation for useful skills while advertising their willingness to protect valuable human resources. Most importantly, the theatrical nature of the destruction libraries burned in public ceremonies, mosques converted to stables, scholars forced to serve as grooms for Mongol horses, creates propaganda material that spreads fear far beyond the immediate battle zone. At Samarkand, the Mongols perfect the techniques of psychological warfare that will soon terrify cities from Moscow to Delhi. The siege itself unfolds according to a carefully choreographed script designed to demonstrate the futility of resistance while showcasing Mongol technical capabilities. Chinese siege engines breach the walls with mechanical precision, but the real assault comes from within as carefully planted rumors about massive reinforcements and supernatural assistance demoralize the defenders. When the city finally surrenders, the Mongols spare the population but force them to participate in constructing massive pyramids from the skulls of soldiers who died defending the walls. The pursuit of Sultan Muhammad across his collapsing empire becomes an exercise in strategic messaging as much as military operation. Rather than simply capturing or killing the fleeing ruler, Mongol forces conduct a running campaign that systematically destroys every symbol of charisma and authority, while demonstrating their ability to project power across unlimited distances. Cities that might have served as refuges for the Sultan find themselves besieged by enemies who seem to anticipate their movements, while local rulers who might have offered assistance instead send tribute to Mongol commanders in hopes of avoiding similar treatment. The campaign reaches its climax with the Siege of Urgench, the Khwarezmian capital that represents the ultimate test of Mongol siege capabilities against the strongest fortifications in Central Asia. The city's defenses, strengthened by years of preparation and defended by the empire's best remaining troops, present challenges that push Mongol engineering to its limits. For 6 months, the siege becomes a contest between Chinese siege techniques and Persian fortification methods, with both sides innovating frantically to gain decisive advantage. The fall of Urgench eliminates the last center of organized Khwarezmian resistance, but the systematic destruction that follows serves notice to the entire Islamic world about the costs of defying Mongol authority. The city's population, estimated at over 100,000 people, is methodically eliminated except for craftsmen and young women deemed useful to the Mongol war effort. The irrigation systems that support agriculture throughout the region are deliberately destroyed, transforming fertile agricultural land into desert that will take generations to recover. Most symbolically, the city itself is razed so thoroughly that its location becomes uncertain to later historians. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire demonstrates the evolution of Mongol warfare from nomadic raiding to systematic conquest designed to eliminate civilizations rather than merely defeating them. Traditional steppe warfare focused on capturing livestock and slaves while leaving basic social structures intact. Genghis Khan has developed something far more devastating: techniques for destroying the economic, political, and cultural foundations that allow societies to recover from military defeat. The speed and thoroughness of the Khwarezmian collapse sends shockwaves throughout the medieval world that reach far beyond the immediate theater of operations. In Europe, chroniclers struggle to understand reports about Asian nomads who command Chinese siege engines and Persian administrative systems. In the Islamic world, religious leaders debate whether the Mongol conquests represent divine judgment for spiritual corruption, or simply the latest manifestation of eternal struggle between civilization and barbarism. In China, court officials reassess their assumptions about nomadic military capabilities while wondering whether their own defenses would prove any more effective against such systematic assault. The campaign's conclusion leaves the Mongol Empire in control of Central Asian trade routes that generate wealth exceeding the tribute of entire kingdoms. More importantly, it establishes the Mongols as the paramount military power in the medieval world, capable of destroying any existing civilization that challenges their authority. The techniques perfected during the Khwarezmian War: systematic intelligence gathering, coordinated multi-front campaigns, sophisticated siege warfare, and psychological operations designed to demoralize entire populations become the template for conquests that will soon reach from Korea to Eastern Europe. As Mongol forces withdraw from the devastated landscape that once contained one of the world's most prosperous civilizations, they leave behind a message that resonates across continents. The age of isolated regional powers is ending, replaced by an imperial system that recognizes no geographical or cultural boundaries to its expansion. Chapter 7: Masters of Loyalty. In the pre-dawn darkness outside Samarkand, two men sit beside a dying fire while their armies sleep in the desert silence. One is Genghis Khan, master of an empire that spans from sunrise to sunset. The other is Jeeb, once called the Arrow for his deadly accuracy with a bow, now renowned as the most trusted of all Mongol generals. 20 years ago, this same Jeeb shot Genghis Khan's horse from under him during a battle between rival tribes, nearly ending the future conqueror's life before his empire began. Tonight, he commands 100,000 warriors who would die at his word, not because they fear him, but because they know he has earned the Khan's absolute trust through decades of unwavering loyalty. The transformation of Jeeb from enemy archer to imperial general encapsulates the revolutionary approach to human relationships that distinguishes Mongol leadership from every other medieval power structure. Where traditional empires rely on birth, ethnicity, or religious affiliation to determine advancement, Genghis Khan has created something unprecedented: a true meritocracy bound together not by shared blood, but by proven devotion to collective success. The men who command his armies, govern his provinces, and advise his councils come from dozens of different tribes and cultures, united only by their demonstrated ability to serve imperial interests above personal ambition. This system of earned loyalty begins with Genghis Khan's own experiences as an outcast who learned that traditional tribal bonds could not be trusted in moments of crisis. When his own clan abandoned his family, when blood relatives tried to enslave him, when sworn brothers betrayed sacred oaths for temporary advantage, he discovered that human nature responds more reliably to consistent reward than to inherited obligation. The lesson shapes everything about how he structures his empire. Loyalty must be earned through mutual benefit rather than assumed through cultural tradition. The practical application of this philosophy transforms the Mongol military from a traditional nomadic confederation into something resembling a modern professional army. Officers advance through demonstrated competence rather than family connections, creating incentive structures that reward effectiveness over aristocratic privilege. Common soldiers know that exceptional service can lead to positions of real authority, making every warrior a potential general whose personal success depends on collective victory. Most importantly, the integration of conquered peoples into Mongol military units creates diversity of skills and perspectives that no ethnically homogeneous force could match. Subutai represents the ultimate expression of this meritocratic approach to military leadership. Born into the Uryan-Kai tribe, forest hunters considered inferior to steppe nomads by traditional Mongol standards, he rises to become the greatest general in an empire filled with military genius. His campaigns span distances that dwarf Alexander's conquests while demonstrating strategic sophistication that impresses Chinese military theorists and Persian tactical experts. When European chroniclers eventually encounter reports of his operations, they struggle to believe that a single commander could coordinate offensives across multiple continents simultaneously. The relationship between Genghis Khan and Subutai illustrates how personal bonds forged through shared hardship create loyalty more durable than any political arrangement. Their partnership begins during the early campaigns against rival Mongol tribes, when Subutai demonstrates not just military skill, but intellectual honesty that allows him to criticize the Khan's strategic decisions when tactical circumstances demand alternative approaches. This willingness to speak truth to power, combined with absolute obedience once decisions are made, establishes a pattern of interaction that makes effective command possible across vast distances and complex operations. The ger, the traditional felt tent that houses Mongol families, becomes a powerful symbol of this new approach to imperial unity. Unlike the fixed palaces that represent power in settled civilizations, the ger embodies mobility, adaptability, and the fundamental equality of all members within its walls. When Genghis Khan receives foreign ambassadors in his ger, he deliberately emphasizes that Mongol leadership depends on personal merit rather than inherited grandeur. The message resonates far beyond diplomatic protocol. It advertises an alternative vision of political organization that appeals to ambitious individuals in societies where advancement depends on accident of birth. The adoption policies that integrate conquered peoples into Mongol society represent perhaps the most radical aspect of this loyalty-based system. Traditional nomadic warfare treated captives as property to be sold or exchanged, but Mongol practice transforms former enemies into full participants in imperial expansion. Chinese siege engineers, Persian administrators, Arab merchants, and Russian cavalry specialists find themselves not just serving Mongol interests, but genuinely advancing their own careers through imperial service. The system creates stakeholders in Mongol success across dozens of cultures and geographical regions. Mongol religious tolerance emerges from the same practical understanding of human motivation that shapes military and administrative policies. Rather than imposing steppe shamanism on conquered populations, Genghis Khan encouraged the preservation of local religious traditions while requiring that spiritual leaders pray for imperial success. Christian priests, Buddhist monks, Islamic scholars, and Confucian administrators discovered that Mongol rule protects their religious practices more effectively than many supposedly co-religious governments. The policy creates religious communities with vested interests in imperial stability while preventing the religiously motivated resistance that plagued other medieval conquest states. The intelligence networks that provide strategic information for Mongol campaigns operate according to these same principles of loyalty through mutual benefit. Rather than relying solely on coercion or ethnic solidarity, Mongol intelligence services recruit agents by offering genuine opportunities for advancement that transcend traditional social boundaries. A Khwarezmian merchant who provides information about trade routes might find himself appointed as administrator of those same routes after Mongol conquest. A Chinese engineer who shares siege techniques might receive command of artillery units that give him more authority than he ever possessed under Chinese rule. The decimal organization system that structures Mongol military units serves as both administrative tool and mechanism for building cross-cultural loyalty. By mixing warriors from different tribes and conquered peoples within the same units, the system prevents any group from developing separate loyalties that might challenge imperial authority. More importantly, it creates artificial kinship bonds based on shared military service that often prove stronger than traditional tribal or ethnic affiliations. Veterans of the same campaigns, regardless of their origins, develop brotherhood forged through common danger and mutual dependence. The promotion of women to positions of real authority within Mongol society demonstrates how thoroughly the empire has abandoned traditional aristocratic assumptions in favor of practical effectiveness. Bert, Genghis Khan's wife, exercises influence over policy decisions that affects millions of people across Asia. Other Mongol women serve as administrators, diplomatic representatives, and even military commanders in situations where their skills prove superior to male alternatives. The practice shocks traditional societies, but creates additional pools of talent that competing empires cannot access. The economic policies that govern Mongol treatment of conquered territories reflect the same understanding that loyalty depends on self-interest rather than coercion. Cities that surrender without resistance often find themselves more prosperous under Mongol rule than they were under previous governments. Trade routes are protected with unprecedented effectiveness. Taxation is systematized and predictable, and commercial disputes are resolved through legal procedures that apply equally regardless of ethnic or religious identity. Merchant classes throughout the empire develop genuine appreciation for Mongol administration that makes them reliable sources of both revenue and intelligence. The Mongol postal service becomes both practical tool and symbol of imperial unity that transcends cultural boundaries. The system of relay stations and messenger routes connects regions that never previously experienced reliable long-distance communication, creating economic opportunities and information exchanges that benefit local populations. More importantly, the service employs thousands of people from dozens of different cultures in positions that require them to identify their interests with imperial efficiency rather than local loyalties. The succession planning that prepares for leadership transitions after Genghis Khan's death demonstrates how thoroughly the loyalty-based system has replaced traditional nomadic practices. Rather than assuming that the Khan's eldest son should inherit supreme authority, Mongol succession procedures emphasize demonstrated competence and ability to maintain the loyalty of key military and administrative leaders. The Kurultai system for selecting new leadership includes representatives from conquered peoples as well as traditional Mongol tribes, acknowledging that imperial legitimacy depends on consensus across the entire empire rather than approval from any single ethnic group. The result of all these innovations is an imperial system that proves more durable and adaptable than any competing medieval power structure. While other empires fragment when founding leaders die, suffer rebellions when conquered peoples assert traditional loyalties or stagnate, when aristocratic privilege prevents talented individuals from advancing, the Mongol Empire continues expanding and adapting because its fundamental organizing principles align individual success with collective achievement. As reports of Mongol governance reach courts and capitals across the known world, they describe something unprecedented in human history, an empire held together not by force alone, but by the systematic cultivation of earned loyalty among diverse populations who discover that imperial service offers opportunities unavailable under any alternative political arrangement. Chapter 8. The Great Hunt. Sultan Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, once the most powerful ruler between China and Egypt, crouches in The reeds beside the Caspian Sea, like a hunted animal, his empire reduced to the clothes on his back and the terror that haunts his sleepless nights. Behind him, across thousands of miles of devastated territory, Mongol armies continue their systematic destruction of everything he once called his own. Ahead lies only the dark water of the inland sea and the growing certainty that there is no place on earth distant enough to escape the reach of Genghis Khan's vengeance. This is the winter of 1220, and the Sultan, who once commanded 1,000,000 warriors, is about to discover that the Mongols have transformed warfare from territorial conquest into something far more personal and infinitely more terrifying. The pursuit of the fleeing Sultan represents a revolution in strategic thinking that demonstrates how thoroughly Genghis Khan has abandoned traditional concepts of warfare in favor of something approaching modern psychological operations. Most medieval military campaigns end with the capture of key cities or the defeat of enemy armies in decisive battles. The Mongol approach treats these conventional objectives as merely preliminary steps in a larger process designed to eliminate not just enemy resistance, but the very possibility of future opposition. By hunting Muhammad personally across his former empire, the Mongols transform military conquest into a demonstration of imperial power that resonates far beyond the immediate theater of operations. The campaign begins with Jib and Subutai, the two greatest generals in an empire filled with military genius, leading 20,000 of the Mongol army's most elite warriors on a mission that seems to violate every principle of sound military strategy. While the main Mongol forces concentrate on reducing the remaining Khwarezmian strongholds, these crack troops abandon secure positions to chase a single fugitive across hostile territory where they have no reliable supply lines, no local allies, and no predetermined objectives beyond the capture or elimination of one man whose strategic value diminishes with every mile he flees from his former centers of power. The apparent recklessness of the operation conceals a sophisticated understanding of how psychological warfare can achieve strategic objectives that conventional military methods cannot approach. The Sultan's flight creates a leadership vacuum that accelerates the collapse of organized Khwarezmian resistance, but his continued survival also represents a potential rallying point for future opposition. More importantly, the systematic nature of the Mongol pursuit sends a message to potential enemies throughout the known world. There is no sanctuary that Mongol power cannot reach, no distance great enough to ensure safety from imperial vengeance, no political arrangement sophisticated enough to prevent Mongol retaliation against those who challenge their authority. The intelligence network that guides the pursuit demonstrates the evolution of Mongol information gathering from tactical reconnaissance to strategic surveillance that operates across continental distances. Local agents recruited during the initial conquest of Khwarezm provide real-time information about the Sultan's movements, while Mongol merchants and diplomatic representatives gather intelligence from regions far beyond the immediate pursuit route. Most remarkably, the Mongols coordinate their chase through communication systems that allow messages to travel faster than the fugitive they are hunting, enabling them to position blocking forces and prepare reception committees that turn the Sultan's flight into an increasingly desperate race through a landscape where every potential refuge has been anticipated and countered. The Mongol forces pursuing Muhammad discover that their mission requires them to traverse geographic and cultural landscapes unlike anything their steppe origins prepared them to encounter. The mountainous terrain of the Caucasus demands tactical adaptations that test nomadic mobility against defensive advantages that favor local knowledge over superior numbers. The political complexity of the region, where dozens of small kingdoms maintain precarious independence through careful management of competing external pressures, presents diplomatic challenges that require sophisticated understanding of local rivalries and religious divisions. Jib and Subutai prove equal to these challenges through intellectual flexibility that exemplifies the Mongol approach to military problem-solving. Rather than imposing steppe tactics on unsuitable terrain, they adapt their methods to exploit local conditions while maintaining the strategic initiative that keeps their quarry constantly moving. In mountain regions, they use traditional nomadic techniques of coordinated pursuit to drive the Sultan toward predetermined ambush sites. In agricultural areas, they employ Chinese siege methods and Persian administrative knowledge to secure local cooperation. Most importantly, they demonstrate the psychological sophistication that allows them to exploit regional politics without becoming entangled in local conflicts that might compromise their primary mission. The Battle of Tigris River becomes an almost accidental encounter that reveals how the pursuit of one fleeing sultan has brought Mongol power to the very edges of European civilization. Russian princes, responding to desperate appeals for assistance from their Cuman allies who have been displaced by the advancing Mongols, assembled the largest European army that has yet faced nomadic forces. The engagement that follows provides European knights with their first direct experience of Mongol military capabilities while giving the Mongols crucial intelligence about European tactical methods and political organization. The Russian defeat at Kalka demonstrates that European heavy cavalry, despite its reputation for invincibility in Western warfare, proves inadequate against enemies who combine steppe mobility with siege engines, coordinated archery, and tactical discipline that allows complex maneuvers to be executed with split-second precision. More ominously for future European security, the battle reveals that Mongol forces can sustain offensive operations at distances that place them within striking range of Kiev, Moscow, and even the wealthy trading cities of Central Europe. The strategic intelligence gathered during this unexpected encounter with European power proves as valuable as any territorial conquest. Mongol commanders observe European tactical methods, assess the quality of European equipment and training, and most importantly, evaluate the political divisions that prevent effective coordination between competing European kingdoms. The information flows back to Mongol headquarters through the imperial communication system, providing strategic planners with detailed assessments of European capabilities that will prove crucial when systematic conquest of Europe begins 2 decades later. The pursuit continues beyond the battlefield, carrying Mongol forces through the Caucasus Mountains and into regions where Asian steppe culture encounters the complex political arrangements that characterize the border zones between Christian and Islamic civilizations. The Mongols navigate these cultural boundaries with the same adaptability they display in military affairs, exploiting religious and ethnic divisions while avoiding entanglement in local conflicts that might compromise their strategic objectives. Throughout the pursuit, the Sultan remains always one step ahead of his hunters. But his flight becomes increasingly desperate as he discovers that his former allies have either submitted to Mongol authority or decided that association with a hunted fugitive represents an unacceptable risk. Cities that might have provided sanctuary instead closed their gates, while local rulers who once sought his favor now compete to provide intelligence to his pursuers. The psychological impact extends far beyond the immediate participants across the medieval world. The spectacle of the once mighty Sultan reduced to desperate flight advertises Mongol power more effectively than any conventional military victory. The chase finally ends not with dramatic confrontation, but with the anticlimactic death of an exhausted man on a desolate island in the Caspian Sea. Muhammad's demise from disease and exhaustion eliminates the last legitimate claimant to Khwarezmian authority, while demonstrating that Mongol vengeance operates according to principles that transcend conventional military logic. The pursuit that began as strategic necessity has become a religious crusade that proves no enemy of the Mongol Empire can escape the consequences of their opposition regardless of distance, time, or circumstance. The return journey provides Jeeb and Subutai with opportunities for additional intelligence gathering that transforms their pursuit mission into reconnaissance for future conquests. They explore alternative routes through the Caucasus that can accommodate larger armies, assess The defensive capabilities of cities that control critical mountain passes and establish relationships with local rulers, who might serve as allies or sources of intelligence during future campaigns. Most importantly, they demonstrate that Mongol forces can operate effectively at distances that place European civilization within range of systematic conquest. The strategic lessons learned during the Great Hunt resonate throughout the Mongol military establishment and influence planning for future campaigns across multiple continents. The successful pursuit of Muhammad proves that traditional concepts of sanctuary and safe distance no longer apply when facing enemies who command superior intelligence networks, unlimited mobility, and the organizational capacity to coordinate operations across continental distances. The psychological impact of the chase demonstrates that personal vengeance can serve strategic objectives by advertising imperial power while demoralizing potential enemies. When Jeeb and Subutai finally return to report the completion of their mission, they bring more than news of the Sultan's death. They carry intelligence about European military capabilities, assessments of Caucasian defensive positions, and most importantly, proof that Mongol power recognizes no geographical boundaries to its expansion. The Great Hunt has become a reconnaissance in force that maps the approaches to European conquest while demonstrating to potential enemies that distance provides no protection against imperial vengeance. Chapter 9. The Final Campaigns. The Gobi Desert stretches endlessly under a merciless sun, its sand-scoured landscape offering no shelter from the wind that carries whispers of mortality across the dunes. In the shadow of the Helen Mountains, an aging conqueror sits astride his warhorse, surveying the walls of Jiangxing, capital of the Tangut Kingdom that has dared to defy his authority one final time. Genghis Khan is 64 years old, his body bearing the accumulated damage of 5 decades of warfare. Yet his eyes still burn with the same fierce intelligence that once transformed a tribal outcast into master of the largest empire in human history. This is 1227, and the man who has conquered nations is about to face his most implacable enemy, time itself. The campaign against the Tanguts represents more than simple military necessity. It has become a deeply personal crusade that reveals the psychological forces driving Genghis Khan through the final phase of his extraordinary life. The Tangut Kingdom, strategically positioned along the Silk Road between China and Central Asia, has repeatedly demonstrated its unreliability as a Mongol vassal, providing tribute when Mongol armies are nearby, but reasserting independence whenever imperial attention focuses elsewhere. For most rulers, such behavior would warrant punitive raids or increased tribute demands. For Genghis Khan, it represents an intolerable challenge to the principle that has governed his entire approach to empire building: absolute submission or complete destruction. The deeper significance of the Tangut War lies in its demonstration of how completely the aging Khan has internalized the lessons of his youth. The boy who watched his own clan abandon his family, who survived betrayal by sworn brothers and enslavement by distant relatives, has grown into a man who cannot tolerate any ambiguity in relationships of power. The Tanguts' vacillation between submission and defiance awakens memories of every betrayal he has suffered, transforming what should be a routine police action into a final settling of accounts with a world that once rejected him. The military preparations for the campaign reveal both the sophisticated war machine that Mongol expansion has created and the personal obsessions that drive its supreme commander. Chinese siege engineers construct artillery specifically designed to breach Tangut fortifications, while Persian administrators organize supply lines that can sustain offensive operations across the harsh terrain of northwestern China. Most remarkably, Khan personally supervises training exercises that prepare his forces for the specialized techniques required to capture cities built on mountain peaks and defended by warriors who prefer death to surrender. The systematic nature of Mongol preparations demonstrates how thoroughly the empire has institutionalized the methods that began as individual innovations during the early tribal wars. Intelligence networks provide detailed information about Tangut military capabilities, economic resources, and political divisions that can be exploited during the coming siege operations. Diplomatic representatives explore possibilities for negotiated surrender, while making it clear that such negotiations represent final opportunities to avoid total destruction. Most ominously, logistical planners calculate supply requirements not just for military conquest, but for the complete elimination of Tangut civilization. The siege of Zhongxing becomes a contest between Mongol determination and Tangut desperation that showcases the evolution of medieval siege warfare under Mongol direction. The city's mountain location provides defensive advantages that nullify traditional steppe tactics, requiring Mongol forces to employ Chinese engineering techniques, Persian siege methods, and innovations developed specifically for this campaign. The resulting combination of catapults, tunneling operations, and coordinated assault tactics represents the pinnacle of 13th century military technology applied with methodical precision that leaves no aspect of defensive capability uncountered. During the long months of siege operations, Genghis Khan suffers a hunting accident that provides both practical and symbolic significance for the empire's future development. The fall from his horse that injures the aging conqueror serves as stark reminder that even the most successful warrior cannot indefinitely postpone the biological limitations that govern all human existence. More importantly, the Khan's insistence on continuing the campaign despite his injuries demonstrates the psychological compulsions that have driven his entire career. The inability to accept any limitation on his power to impose his will on a resistant world. The succession planning that occupies much of the Khan's attention during the final campaign reveals the sophisticated understanding of human nature that has characterized his approach to leadership throughout his career. Rather than simply designating his eldest son as heir, he carefully evaluates each potential successor according to demonstrated competence in military command, administrative capability, and most critically ability to maintain the loyalty of subordinate leaders who have their own ambitions for advancement. The process culminates in the selection of Dede, whose combination of tactical skill and diplomatic sophistication best qualifies him to preserve imperial unity during the dangerous transition period following the founder's death. The detailed instructions that Genghis Khan provides for imperial governance after his death demonstrate both his strategic vision and his understanding that even the most successful institutions require constant adaptation to changing circumstances. The decimal military organization that has proven so effective during the conquest phase must evolve to accommodate the administrative requirements of governing settled populations across vast distances. The meritocratic promotion policies that created imperial unity must be modified to prevent the emergence of competing power centers that might fragment imperial authority. Most importantly, the expansion policies that have driven Mongol success must continue operating according to systematic principles rather than depending on the personal charisma of individual leaders. The psychological dimensions of the Khan's final campaign extend beyond military and political considerations to encompass his evolving relationship with mortality and legacy. The man who wants to find himself through constant expansion and the accumulation of power must now confront the reality that his personal authority will inevitably pass to successors whose capabilities and loyalties cannot be guaranteed. The Tangut War becomes his final opportunity to demonstrate that Mongol power operates according to principles that transcend individual leadership, creating institutions durable enough to survive the transition to new management. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Genghis Khan's death add elements of legend to the historical record that serve imperial interests, even as they obscure factual details. Whether he dies from injuries sustained in his hunting accident, from illness contracted during the siege, or from assassination by Tangut agents becomes less important than the carefully orchestrated response that transforms personal mortality into imperial mythology. The secrecy surrounding his burial location, the execution of witnesses who might reveal details about his final moments, and the elaborate protocols designed to conceal imperial vulnerability from potential enemies all demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how political symbolism can preserve authority during periods of institutional transition. The systematic elimination of Tangut civilization that follows the Khan's death represents both fulfillment of his final military objective and demonstration that imperial institutions can function effectively without direct personal supervision. The methodical destruction of Tangut cities, the dispersal of surviving populations throughout the empire, and the elimination of political structures that might support future resistance all proceed according to plans developed during the siege while Genghis Khan still lived. The campaign's completion proves that Mongol expansion operates according to institutional momentum rather than depending entirely on individual leadership. The burial preparations that accompany the Khan's death reveal the careful planning that has characterized every aspect of his approach to leadership throughout his career. The secret location chosen for his tomb ensures that it cannot become a shrine that might support rival claims to imperial authority. The execution of burial attendants prevents information leaks that might compromise security arrangements. Most importantly, the religious ceremonies that accompany his interment emphasize continuity with traditional Mongol spiritual practices while adapting those traditions to serve the requirements of world empire. The immediate succession crisis that follows demonstrates both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the governmental system that Genghis Khan created during his lifetime. The Kurultai that confirms Gedai as the new Great Khan includes representatives from conquered peoples as well as traditional Mongol tribes, acknowledging that imperial legitimacy depends on consensus across the entire empire rather than approval from any single ethnic group. However, the 2-year delay between Genghis Khan's death and his successor's formal confirmation reveals the tensions that inevitably develop when personal charisma must be replaced by institutional authority. The legacy consolidation that occurs during the succession period establishes precedents that will govern Mongol imperial development for generations. The principle that great Khans must be confirmed by Kurultai rather than inheriting authority automatically creates mechanisms for peaceful leadership transitions while preventing the emergence of incompetent rulers. The maintenance of expansion policies under new leadership demonstrates that conquest has become institutionalized, rather than depending on individual initiative. Most importantly, the successful transition from Genghis Khan to Gedai proves that the revolutionary political principles developed during the founder's lifetime can survive his death and continue driving imperial expansion across multiple continents. Chapter 10. The Inheritance of Fear. The Great Kurultai of 1229 assembles under skies that seem to mirror the vast scope of Mongol ambition, stretching endlessly above a gathering that represents every corner of the known world. Princes from China sit beside warriors from the Russian steppes. Persian administrators confer with Hungarian captives, and through it all moves Gedai Khan, third son of Genghis Khan, and inheritor of an empire that his father's death has left poised between unprecedented expansion and potential fragmentation. 2 years have passed since the great conqueror's death, and the assembly that confirms Gedai as the new Great Khan faces a fundamental question. Can the revolutionary principles that created the world's largest empire survive the transition from personal charisma to institutional authority? The answer emerges not through debate or ceremony, but through the systematic implementation of conquest plans that demonstrate how thoroughly Genghis Khan succeeded in transforming Mongol expansion from personal ambition into imperial destiny. Within months of his confirmation, Gedai launches simultaneous campaigns that dwarf even his father's most ambitious operations. 3 separate armies, each larger than most medieval kingdoms, could field advance toward objectives separated by thousands of miles. One toward the final destruction of the Jin dynasty in northern China, another toward the conquest of Europe, and a third toward the completion of Persian subjugation that will eliminate the last centers of Islamic resistance. The European campaign represents the ultimate test of whether Mongol military methods can function effectively against opponents who have never experienced nomadic warfare. Beta Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, leads the Western expedition with strategic guidance from Subutai, whose earlier reconnaissance had identified European vulnerabilities that systematic exploitation could transform into continental conquest. The invasion that begins in 1237 unfolds like a carefully orchestrated demonstration of how thoroughly the Mongols have institutionalized the tactical innovations that once depended on Genghis Khan's personal genius. The destruction of Kiev in 1240 provides European chroniclers with their first direct experience of Mongol siege techniques, and the reports that filter back to Western courts describe military capabilities that seem to violate fundamental assumptions about the relationship between nomadic barbarism and civilized warfare. The city's massive fortifications designed to withstand conventional medieval assault methods prove inadequate against enemies who combine Chinese engineering with Islamic mathematics and European metallurgy, creating siege engines that can breach any wall while maintaining the mobility that allows rapid redeployment between widely separated targets. The psychological warfare techniques perfected during the Central Asian campaigns prove equally effective against European opponents whose cultural assumptions make them particularly vulnerable to systematic demoralization. Mongol forces approaching each target city send carefully composed messages that exploit Christian theological concepts to present nomadic conquest as divine judgment against corrupt rulers and oppressive social systems. The propaganda proves remarkably effective among peasant populations who discover that Mongol rule often provides better protection against banditry and arbitrary taxation than the feudal authorities it replaces. The Battle of Mohi in 1241 demonstrates how completely Mongol tactical methods have evolved beyond their nomadic origins to incorporate lessons learned from conflicts across 3 continents. Hungarian forces, representing the most sophisticated military organization in Eastern Europe, find themselves facing enemies who anticipate every European tactical method while employing countermeasures that neutralize heavy cavalry, crossbow units, and fortified positions with mechanical precision. The engagement unfolds less like a battle than like a military exercise designed to test European capabilities against systematic Mongol responses. The simultaneous advance toward Poland reveals the logistical sophistication that allows Mongol forces to coordinate operations across distances that European military planners consider impossible to manage effectively. While Beta Khan reduces Hungarian resistance, a separate Mongol army under Kadu advances through Poland toward the wealthy German principalities, maintaining communication with the main force through the postal system that enables strategic coordination across continental distances. The speed and precision of Mongol movements creates the impression among European observers that they face supernatural enemies who can appear simultaneously in multiple locations. The destruction of Krakow and the victory at Legnica eliminate the last significant military obstacles to Mongol penetration into the heart of European civilization, bringing nomadic armies within striking distance of the Holy Roman Empire and the wealthy trading cities of the Rhine Valley. European rulers, previously confident in their military superiority and geographical isolation, suddenly confront the reality that no existing defensive arrangements can prevent nomadic conquest if the Mongols choose to continue their systematic advance toward the Atlantic Ocean. The death of Genghis Khan in December 1241 creates a succession crisis that inadvertently saves European civilization from systematic conquest while demonstrating both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the imperial system that Genghis Khan created. Mongol commanders, bound by constitutional principles that require Kurultai confirmation of new leadership, abandon their European campaigns to participate in succession deliberations that last nearly 5 years. The withdrawal provides European kingdoms with breathing space to recover from initial defeats, while revealing the institutional constraints that even supreme military success cannot entirely overcome. The conquest of Baghdad in 1258 under Genghis Khan represents the culmination of Islamic resistance to Mongol expansion and provides the clearest demonstration of how thoroughly the empire has institutionalized the destructive capabilities that once depended on Genghis Khan as personal direction. The systematic elimination of the Abbasid Caliphate eliminates the last symbol of unified Islamic authority while demonstrating Mongol capacity for cultural destruction that transcends military necessity. The burning of the House of Wisdom, with its irreplaceable collection of Greek, Persian, and Arabic texts, symbolizes the collision between nomadic pragmatism and sedentary intellectual achievement. The administrative innovations that emerged during Gedai's reign reveal how successfully the Mongol Empire has evolved from nomadic confederation to sophisticated governmental system capable of managing diverse populations across vast distances. Chinese bureaucratic methods, Persian administrative traditions, and Islamic legal principles are synthesized into hybrid institutions that maintain imperial unity while accommodating local customs and religious practices. The resulting system proves more flexible and efficient than most contemporary governmental arrangements, while generating revenues that dwarf the tribute systems that supported earlier nomadic confederations. The expansion of the postal service under Gedai demonstrates how infrastructure development has become integral to a Mongol imperial strategy rather than mere administrative convenience. The network of relay stations and messenger routes that eventually spans from Korea to Eastern Europe creates communication capabilities that allow real-time coordination of military and political operations across continental distances. More importantly, the system provides economic opportunities and information exchanges that benefit local populations, while creating stakeholders in imperial stability throughout the conquered territories. The religious tolerance policies that reach their fullest development during this period demonstrate how thoroughly the Mongols have abandoned ethnic nationalism in favor of pragmatic imperialism that values useful diversity over cultural uniformity. Christian churches, Buddhist monasteries, Islamic schools, and Confucian academies all receive imperial protection, while contributing their specialized knowledge to imperial administration. The resulting cultural synthesis creates intellectual exchanges that advance scientific understanding while generating technological innovations that enhance imperial capabilities. The economic integration that accompanies territorial expansion transforms the Mongol Empire into the world's first truly global commercial system, connecting markets and production centers that never previously experienced reliable long-distance trade. The protection of merchant activities, standardization of weights and measures, and elimination of local tariffs create commercial opportunities that generate wealth exceeding the plunder obtained through military conquest. Cities throughout the empire often become more prosperous under Mongol rule than they were under previous governments, creating economic incentives for cooperation that supplement the political loyalties maintained through military force. The succession arrangements that govern imperial transitions after Gedai's death reveal both the durability and limitations of the constitutional principles that Genghis Khan established for managing leadership changes. The Kurultai system prevents the emergence of incompetent rulers while ensuring that succession disputes are resolved through institutional processes rather than civil war. However, the increasing complexity of imperial administration and the growing influence of settled populations create pressures for governmental changes that gradually modify traditional nomadic political practices. The cultural legacy that emerges during this period of consolidation demonstrates how conquest has generated unintended consequences that transform both conquerors and conquered in ways that neither group anticipated. Mongol rulers increasingly adopt the cultural practices of their settled subjects while maintaining the military and political institutions that made conquest possible. The resulting synthesis creates new forms of imperial organization that influence political development across Asia and Europe for centuries after the original nomadic empire fragments into separate kingdoms. The technological transfers that accompany Mongol expansion distribute innovations across geographical and cultural boundaries that previously prevented systematic knowledge exchange, accelerating scientific and technical development throughout the conquered territories. Chinese engineering techniques, Islamic mathematical methods, and European metallurgical processes are combined and refined through imperial workshops that create new possibilities for both military and civilian applications. Chapter 11. Echoes Through Eternity. In a laboratory in Oxford, England, a geneticist peers through a microscope at DNA samples to tell a story more extraordinary than any medieval chronicle. The year is 2003, and Dr. Chris Tyler-Smith has just discovered that approximately 16 million men across Asia carry Y chromosome markers that trace their lineage to a single individual who lived 800 years ago. The statistical analysis reveals a pattern of genetic distribution that follows the exact boundaries of the Mongol Empire at its greatest extent, suggesting that one man's biological legacy has proven more enduring than the political structures he created. Genghis Khan, it appears, conquered not just territories but the human gene pool itself, leaving descendants who constitute nearly 1% of the world's male population. This genetic footprint represents only the most measurable aspect of a historical impact that continues reverberating through modern civilization in ways both obvious and subtle. The Mongol Empire's collapse in the 14th century marked the end of the world's largest contiguous land empire, but the systems, institutions, and cultural exchanges it fostered had already set in motion historical processes that would reshape human development for centuries to come. The Khan, who once declared himself the punishment of God, had inadvertently become the architect of global modernity. The technological revolution that emerges from Mongol-sponsored cultural exchange demonstrates how conquest can accelerate human progress in ways that purely peaceful development might never achieve. Chinese printing technology, transmitted through Mongol commercial networks, reaches Islamic centers of learning where Arabic and Persian scholars adapted to serve their own intellectual traditions. The resulting explosion of book production democratizes knowledge in ways that transform educational possibilities across 3 continents. Similarly, Islamic mathematical concepts and Hindu numerical systems spread through Mongol administrative networks to reach Chinese and European scholars who incorporate them into their own scientific traditions. The cartographic revolution that accompanies Mongol expansion creates the first truly accurate maps of the Eurasian landmass, establishing geographical knowledge that makes later European exploration possible. The systematic surveys conducted by Mongol administrators to assess taxation potential and military requirements generate detailed information about distances, topography, and resource distribution that far exceeds anything available to earlier civilizations. When European explorers like Marco Polo travel through Mongol territories, they gain access to geographical knowledge that influences navigation techniques and trade route planning for generations. The medical advances that result from Mongol-sponsored knowledge exchange demonstrate how imperial unification can accelerate scientific progress through the systematic combination of different cultural traditions. Chinese acupuncture techniques, Islamic surgical methods, and Persian pharmaceutical knowledge are shared through imperial administrative networks that bring specialists from different traditions into direct contact. The resulting medical synthesis generates new treatment methods that are then distributed throughout the empire, creating healthcare capabilities that exceed those available in any contemporary civilization. The agricultural innovations that spread through Mongol commercial networks transformed food production across vast regions, while demonstrating how technological transfer can occur through trade relationships as well as military conquest. Chinese crop varieties and farming techniques reach Central Asian and Middle Eastern agricultural regions where they increase yields and support larger populations. Islamic irrigation methods and Persian horticulture spread eastward to enhance Chinese agricultural productivity. The resulting increases in food security support population growth that provides human resources for further technological and cultural development. The monetary systems that evolve under Mongol sponsorship create the first international currency arrangements that facilitate long-distance trade across cultural and political boundaries. The empire's guarantee of commercial security, combined with standardized weights and measures, enables merchants to conduct business across distances that were previously uneconomical due to transaction costs and security risks. The resulting expansion of trade volume generates wealth that supports urban growth, technological innovation, and cultural development throughout the empire. The diplomatic precedents established through Mongol international relations influenced subsequent political development across multiple continents. The empire's systematic use of diplomatic immunity, formal treaty procedures, and international law concepts creates institutional frameworks that later European powers adapt for their own interstate relations. The Mongol practice of maintaining permanent diplomatic representatives in foreign courts establishes precedents for modern embassy systems that remain fundamental to international relations. The linguistic changes that result from Mongol imperial unification create new possibilities for cultural exchange that persist long after political fragmentation eliminates imperial authority. The empire's use of multiple languages for administrative purposes, combined with the necessity for translation services across vast cultural distances, generates linguistic innovations that facilitate communication between previously isolated communities. Trade languages and diplomatic protocols developed under Mongol sponsorship continue, serving international commerce and diplomacy for centuries after the empire's collapse. The religious tolerance policies that characterize Mongol governance create precedents for pluralistic societies that influence subsequent political development across multiple civilizations. The empire's systematic protection of diverse religious traditions while maintaining secular political authority demonstrates alternative approaches to managing cultural diversity that contrast sharply with the religious uniformity demanded by most contemporary governments. These precedents influence later political theorists who seek models for governing multicultural societies. The urban planning innovations that emerge in Mongol-sponsored cities demonstrate how imperial resources can support architectural and engineering projects that exceed the capabilities of smaller political units. The construction of Karakorum, the empire's capital, incorporates design elements from Chinese, Persian, and European architectural traditions while creating infrastructure systems that support international commerce and administration. Similar innovations in other imperial cities create urban models that influence city planning across Asia and Europe. The educational reforms that accompany Mongol administrative development create new opportunities for intellectual advancement that transcend traditional cultural boundaries. The empire's meritocratic appointment procedures require standardized educational credentials that lead to the establishment of schools and examination systems accessible to students regardless of ethnic or religious background. These innovations generate educated administrative classes that continue serving governmental functions long after imperial fragmentation creates separate political entities. The legal developments that emerge from Mongol efforts to govern diverse populations create hybrid legal systems that combine elements from multiple cultural traditions while maintaining imperial unity. The Yasa, the Mongol legal code, incorporates practical elements from Chinese, Islamic, and steppe legal traditions while establishing precedents for secular law that transcends religious authority. These innovations influence subsequent legal development across multiple civilizations. The environmental changes that result from Mongol conquest and administration demonstrate both the constructive and destructive potential of imperial power when applied on continental scales. The systematic destruction of irrigation systems in Central Asia creates ecological damage that persists for centuries, while the protection of trade routes and agricultural regions generates environmental improvements that support population growth and economic development. The empire's impact on disease transmission, through both military campaigns and commercial networks, influences demographic patterns across multiple continents. The cultural synthesis that emerges from Mongol imperial unification creates new forms of artistic expression that combine elements from multiple traditions while serving imperial political purposes. The artistic workshops established in major Mongol cities bring together craftsmen from across the empire, generating innovations in textile production, metalworking, and architectural decoration that influence aesthetic development for centuries. The patronage systems that support these workshops create economic opportunities for artists, while spreading new techniques and styles throughout the empire. The historical memory of Mongol conquest continues influencing political and cultural development long after the empire, as fragmentation eliminates its direct political impact. In China, the Yuan dynasty's rule under Kublai Khan establishes precedents for foreign governance that influence subsequent political development while contributing to Chinese concepts of universal empire. In Russia, the period of Mongol dominance shapes political institutions and cultural attitudes that persist through the Tsarist and Soviet periods. In the Islamic world, the destruction of Baghdad and the elimination of the Abbasid Caliphate creates political and religious changes that continue influencing Islamic civilization. The nationalist revival that occurs in modern Mongolia demonstrates how historical memory can be mobilized to serve contemporary political purposes while creating new relationships with imperial legacy. The transformation of Genghis Khan from symbol of barbaric destruction to embodiment of Mongolian national identity reflects broader patterns of historical reinterpretation that occur when modern nations seek usable paths that support current political objectives. The resulting mythology combines historical fact with contemporary political needs while influencing international perceptions of Mongolian culture and capabilities. The scholarly reassessment that characterizes modern historical study of the Mongol Empire demonstrates how changing intellectual frameworks can transform understanding of past events while revealing previously unrecognized patterns of historical development. The recognition that Mongol conquest facilitated technological transfer, cultural exchange, and institutional innovation challenges traditional narratives that emphasize destruction while overlooking constructive consequences that prove more historically significant than immediate military impact. The Ger stands, silent now on the endless steppes, its felt walls weathered by centuries of wind and snow, yet still sheltering the dreams and nightmares of a civilization that once trembled at the sound of Mongol horses. Inside, tourists from around the world photograph artifacts and listen to guides explain how one man's vision transformed the medieval world. But their comfortable distance from history cannot diminish the fundamental questions that Genghis Khan's legacy poses to every generation. What is the true relationship between power and morality? Can greatness be separated from the suffering it creates? And perhaps most troubling of all, how much are we willing to sacrifice for the promise of unity, progress, and order? The paradox of Genghis Khan resists easy resolution because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and historical progress. The same man who ordered the systematic destruction of entire civilizations also created the most religiously tolerant empire in medieval history. The conqueror, who weaponized terror more effectively than any ruler before or since, also established legal systems that protected merchants, scholars, and craftsmen regardless of their ethnic or religious identity. The nomadic warlord, who reduced Baghdad's libraries to ash, also sponsored the greatest expansion of international trade and cultural exchange the world had yet witnessed. Modern scholarship has begun to recognize that these contradictions reflect not moral confusion, but strategic sophistication that transcended the ethical frameworks of his time. Genghis Khan understood something that contemporary rulers missed. Sustainable empire requires both the capacity to destroy resistance and the ability to reward cooperation. Fear without the possibility of redemption creates only temporary submission. Loyalty without the threat of consequences invites eventual betrayal. His genius lay in calibrating these forces with mathematical precision, creating a system where the costs of resistance always exceeded the benefits of submission. The genetic legacy that links 16 million modern men to the great Khan serves as biological testimony to a historical truth that transcends moral judgment. Successful power structures reproduce themselves, not just through institutional inheritance, but through the most fundamental human process of all. The empire that began with one man's refusal to accept limitations on his ambition ultimately transcended every boundary that medieval civilization recognized: geographical, cultural, religious, and biological. Today, as globalization creates new forms of cultural exchange and technological integration, as international commerce operates across the same trade routes that Mongol merchants once traveled, as diplomatic immunity protects representatives navigating between civilizations that still struggle to understand each other, we live in a world that Genghis Khan's vision helped create. The methods were brutal, the costs immense, but the legacy endures. One man's hunger for absolute loyalty and systematic use of fear changed human civilization forever, proving that history belongs not to the righteous, but to those who understand power deeply enough to wield it without limits or apology.